It has been an insanely stacked year for video games. With us halfway through the year and not even halfway through the large titles that are supposed to drop this year, gamers have been eating real good. And with the release of the newest mainline Final Fantasy game in 7 years, Final Fantasy XVI has a lot to compete with, not just with its competition from other studios, but within its own franchise of games as well. To hold the name Final Fantasy is a large responsibility. It is one of the most popular video game franchises in the world, and arguably the most well-known JRPG series ever created. Luckily, Yoshi P and the gang from CB Unit 3 have risen to the task and created one of my favorite video game experiences in a long time. I will say, this is not a perfect experience, but rarely are the perfect experiences the ones that stick with us for a long time. And that's what Final Fantasy XVI is, a slightly flawed, but beautiful adventure. I've mentioned this before, but Final Fantasy and Kingdom Hearts are my favorite video game franchises of all time. While I can certainly acknowledge that I've played quote-unquote better series, Final Fantasy and Kingdom Hearts go back to my earliest memories with video games, and ever since I was a little kid, they've held a special place in my heart. That being said, I expect a lot from these series, especially Final Fantasy. I don't want these games to just pander to what I love about the series. I want it to challenge what it means to be a Final Fantasy game. And luckily, the gameplay doesn't just do that, but it's one of the best action combat systems I've played in a long time. Some might say Final Fantasy XVI is the series' departure from its ATB origins and is trying to do something completely different. Except it isn't. There hasn't been a turn-based mainline Final Fantasy since 10, and to think that it would go back to turn-based now, especially after 7 Remake, is ludicrous. Sorry, I just had to get that off my chest for no reason. The combat is extremely fun. The mechanics come from ex-Devil May Cry combat dev Ryota Suzuki. The combat takes heavy inspiration from the Devil May Cry series, but making it more new player friendly. The combat is super easy to learn, but absolutely fun to master. I had some trouble at first because the button mapping definitely takes some time getting used to. You can change it between different presets, but every map setting has one button that feels sorta off, so I just stuck with the default. But once I did get it, I was having a blast. The game literally makes you use every button on the DualShock. You know those scenes in movies and TV where a character is playing video games and they're going like hog wild on a controller? Yeah, Final Fantasy XVI made that look realistic. The new and biggest feature of the game are the new iconic abilities. Strong attacks that are meant to be interwoven with your combos to do devastating damage to your enemy's health and stagger. The stagger mechanic is much like the one from 7 Remake to those who have played it. When you break an opponent's stagger bar, you have a small time period where you can unleash devastating attacks for more damage. These were so much fun to mix and match. The combos look cool and make you feel cool. There were literal hours where I went into the practice arena just trying to figure out what were the most optimal combos I could dish out. I just read that back. Oh my god, dude. Fighting games have broken my brain. But you aren't just fighting as Clive in this game, as you also embody his icon or summon, Ifrit. These are some of the coolest boss battles in video game history. You really feel the weight of the devastating monster you are controlling as you rip apart your opponent. These fights are the embodiment of those times as a kid where you classed your action figures together. The developers kinda just get it. I won't spoil these fights too hard, but the Bahamut fight changed me as a man. I'll be thinking about that fight for a long time. But I will say, the game is a little easy. The footage you are seeing here is from its New Game Plus mode, and I wish a difficulty closer to this was available from the start. In the game, there are hunts, and while the first few S-rank fights made me run out of potions, towards the end game, these fights stay the same difficulty and begin to challenge you less and less. This was never enough to make me dislike the game, but it's just a little critique I had. The combat system is definitely the pride and joy of this game, and you can tell a lot of effort and time went into development for absolutely stellar results. But this is a Final Fantasy game, and Final Fantasy as a history has always pushed the boundaries of what a game could look like. So, how does this game present itself? Presentation to the Final Fantasy series is a big deal. The term Final Fantasy-like is a common expression used when people talk about over-the-top CGI anime cutscenes. Final Fantasy XVI continues this legacy by creating the prettiest cutscenes to date in this current gen. There were cutscenes where it switched from CGI to in-game, and the only reason that I knew that it switched was because I noticed that Clive was wearing a different sword in each cutscene. I straight up would not have known otherwise. And those boss fights I was talking about, those have genuinely created the new golden standard for kaiju fights. Every icon fight had my jaw dropped and my underwear soaked. The CGI worked so well because its art direction basically lent itself to look good in that medium. Final Fantasy XVI is actually the first game since the franchise's first few titles that returns to its high fantasy setting. Futuristic tech takes the backseat as we are given a world that's a little more Game of Thrones sprinkled with Final Fantasy goodies. Honestly, the entire game is basically like a Game of Thrones plot and world, sprinkled with a few Final Fantasy tidbits with the coolest Ultraman choreography as the cherry on top. It's a golden combination, trust me. The presentation also knocks it out of the park when it comes to character design. I mean, it's a Final Fantasy game. If the character designs don't at least make you question if you're bi or not, something is wrong. But I should mention that this game does have a couple of performance issues. The frames are all over the place. Honestly, I'm not the type of person that gets upset about modern day games being 30 FPS, but if you add a performance mode, you gotta at least make it somewhat consistent with the frame rates. It got a bit distracting at times. I'm really looking forward to the day that this game is released on PC just for the sake of performance issues. And lastly, and certainly not least, there's the music. Man, when I tell you Soken was cooking, I don't know how he does it. As someone who's played Final Fantasy XIV, he has never made a bad song. And somehow, with this new game, it still holds true. When that soundtrack comes out, I will be blasting that Titan boss music in the gym. The only critique that I have is that for some reason, the soundtrack doesn't release till sometime later in July. I'm begging you, Squeenix, please drop it early. I really like the story of Final Fantasy XVI. Final Fantasy is great because it lends itself to tell a wide variety of stories. I'm genuinely surprised it took them this long to get a more mature rating. Final Fantasy stories at its core are about human relationships. Relationships with each other, relationships with the world, and relationships with ideologies. Final Fantasy XVI nails it on the head by telling a story about all three, while taking more mature themes of racial inequality, slavery, and genocide to tell its story. The game still has its melodramatic moments, and it wears its heart on its sleeve like any Final Fantasy game should, but it's not afraid to delve into its implied atrocities. It combines these things really well. But that being said, my biggest complaint of this game is definitely its pacing. RPGs in general are very hard to pace because of how massive they can be. Final Fantasy XVI is no exception. The game is a roller coaster when it comes to its plot, especially in the middle. There are times when the main story incorporates fetch quests, and those are pretty rough, I'm not gonna lie. But when it's going hard, it goes hard. But when it's trying to build to those moments, it falls a little flat. The side quests in this game are no different. Side quests range from kinda boring to absolutely tear-jerking. But sadly, a majority of these great side quests aren't available to the last chapter of the game, and it kinda dumps these quests on you all at once. I think before the last chapter of the game, it presents you with like 11 new side quests. I just wish those were paced out a little bit better. I will say though, playing through these side quests changes the way that you see the ending of the game, for better or for worse. That's all I'll say without spoiling. But something I did love in this game is that it has like 3 different lore indexes. None of them are mandatory, but if you're the type of person who loves looking at maps on the inside of a book, you'll absolutely love these features. The biggest of these features is the active time lore, where if you hold down the middle button during a cutscene or gameplay, it'll give you key information on locations, characters, and events that are relevant to the quest you are on. And good thing, because this is an incredibly lore-rich game. This might be the most lore-rich Final Fantasy game, maybe even more than 7. Mad props to the story team because this world feels extremely fleshed out. And without spoiling, if you actually delve into these lore tools, it'll reward you in certain ways related to the plot. The world of Valistia is one of the most fleshed out video game worlds I've ever seen, and I really hope we get to see more of it in some shape or form. Overall, the plot might need some work, but the story still functions to tell a beautiful story about life, loss, the human condition, and the freedom that is given to us as human beings. It'll make you laugh, cry, cheer, and wanting for more. When hearing this was a single-player adventure, I was a bit scared that outside of Clive, the character work might be a little lackluster, but thank God I was wrong. It's actually really impressive how the game makes you care for so many characters that you don't play as. The entire main cast is just so good. They each go through their own journeys and have their own quirks that just make it so easy to care for them. Also, this game features the first gay Final Fantasy character in an openly gay relationship, and they said, yeah, we're gonna make him the coolest fucking character in the game. Happy Pride Month, bitches. Even some of the NPCs you talk to just ooze good writing. All I'm gonna say is Carla. But with that, I gotta give props to the main cast. Clive is in my top 5 Final Fantasy protagonists, and he's not 5. He kinda takes that hardened protagonist trope, but still retains the heart and emotion of a complex character. He definitely has his stoic moments, but you can see that all of the tragedies that happened to him didn't strip him of the character that we were presented in the prologue, which is an insanely amazing change of pace for that type of character. Now, Jill is in my top 3 female Final Fantasy characters. I love that even though she's been hardened by her past and is still struggling with the weight of her choices, she still retains the elegance of that noble that we were presented in the prologue. And when she gets her moment to shine, I was genuinely moved. Absolutely stellar character work. Also, Sid is my dad. Sid is everyone's dad. I love Sid. There's a 4th character that is a spoiler, but those who have played know who I'm talking about. He is actually my favorite character. I love what they did with him. Also, I am free next Sunday, so please go on a date with me. Same goes with Tarya and Mid. Also, to those of you who know my channel, I like to give shoutouts to voice actors because I'm a big fan of voice acting, but I want to give a special shout out to this whole cast. Final Fantasy XVI is the first game in the franchise that was made specifically for English. And that could have gone so wrong in so many ways, but instead, it's some of the best voice acting, period. Mad props to the whole cast, but especially Ben Starr, who you can tell just absolutely loves Clive. You can hear the difference when you can tell a voice actor just loves their character. Ben, if you happen to see this, I sobbed multiple times because of you specifically. Thank you. Also, Ralph Ineson, your voice is like warm earmuffs on my brain. Thank you as well. All in all, this game was a recipe for success. I genuinely don't think I've seen anything like the hype for this game when its demo dropped. People who were on the fence about this game or didn't even care about it pre-ordered that shit so fast, it was unbelievable. And I'm really glad that this game seems to be doing well. We seem to be in this renaissance for the Final Fantasy franchise, and I don't see it going away anytime soon. But also, with this good reception, there has been a small but vocal group about whether or not this is a Final Fantasy game, and honestly, is this a Final Fantasy game? Can you even call it a mainline Final Fantasy game? Yes, it is. Fuck off. No, but for real, Jesse Cox made a beautiful video on this topic and you should go watch it. But to me, Final Fantasy has always been about a feeling. Sure, there are chocobos, summons, Moogles, all of which are in Final Fantasy XVI, by the way, but Final Fantasy, to me, has always been about that feeling of going on an adventure. It's the purest form of the hero's journey. It's making the circle, and when you finish it and you see those credits roll, you don't feel like the same person you were before you started the game. Whether that's tearing up, having a big ol' smile on your face, or feeling an empty gash in your heart, or maybe it's all three. You just know that the characters that you met and the story you just finished will stick with you forever. And Final Fantasy XVI does that. No matter who you are or your experiences with this franchise, this game wishes to tell you a story that leaves you changed, whatever that happens to mean for you.